Okay. So that's the really the topic for today. And more specifically, what are the three steps to building a repeatable sales model? And the first step really is strategy. What really is your strategy? In other words, where's your best opportunities and where do you need to focus? And then the second step is then what's your go-to-market plan? So, what's in your marketing and prospecting plans? Because, unless you have a really strategic approach, then maybe you're not really developing the best plans to really take advantage of where your opportunities are. And then step three is really what do we need to do with our sales force to make any changes? And what I find is far too often people are jumping to step three. It's like, we need to do something with sales. So let's go out and get a salesperson. And until you've really taken a look at really what's our strategy, what's our go-to-market plan, how do you know that you're really getting the right person, you're putting them in the right role, you're setting them up to be successful, and sometimes they don't work out. And how do you know that that was a result of getting the wrong person, or you didn't really set them up the right way with the right strategy or systems or expectations? But once you have all these three steps in place, then you start executing and measuring. And so once you've put that in place where you're measuring the results and executing on the plan and monitoring that, that enables you to then adjust to make things more efficient, more effective, and make sure that you're following what your expectations are. Okay. By the way, as we go through these topics, feel free to ask questions. Interrupt if you have a question. I will try to pay attention to the chat. If there's something that comes in there, I'll take a look and see if there's a question there, but I may miss it. So, feel free to go ahead and unmute and interrupt me at will if you have a question, because we're going to be going from subject to subject and you might forget. And if we have time at the end, then, perhaps we can entertain some questions then. Okay. So really step one is your strategy. And that's really what segmentation, what customer groups represent your best opportunity, and I'm not sure, I didn't really get a chance to take a look at who all has logged in here, but some of the people who registered were contract manufacturers, for example. And contract manufacturers tend to be in a lot of different markets. So it could be in aerospace and defense or consumer products or medical device. And, the question is really, where is your best opportunity? And the type of customers that we deal with, they're not big corporations. So we have, with limited resources, how can you be everything to everybody? And the other thing is, where is your best opportunity? Okay. That where you should really be focusing. Some of them were actually both in commercial and residential. I mean, obviously you're going to go to market quite a bit differently in those different markets. And I know some of you are with a client of mine that, you sell pumps, for example, and you have aftermarket opportunities and you have new construction opportunities. And the people that are buying and how the products get bought are entirely different in those markets. On one hand, you have property managers and institutional facilities managers buying. On the other hand, you have engineers specifying products and then contractors buying them. So the people you're dealing with are entirely different. In fact, on the new construction side, the HVAC people could be quite a bit different than the plumbing people. So, you have to really understand how you're going to go to market and who is it that you're dealing with and what's the process through which you need to sell to them because of how they buy. And then what products they're buying. So, for example, I had a client that made diffusers and grills for HVAC systems, okay? And they found that their best new market opportunities were in hospital surgical centers because they changed all the ventilation requirements for COVID, and clean rooms because there was a lot of development in semiconductor and pharmaceutical. And when we were looking at that, how to go to market, their existing distribution partners, which they needed because there's mechanical contractors all over the place, and that's how they sold through. But not all of them were tied into the hospital market, so we had to develop some new ones. But the clean room market was all done by design build contractors, and there are a few of them. So it lent itself more to a direct sale approach. And then when they started to develop those relationships with those design build contractors, then they discovered how did they like the products to be set up. And they ended up designing entire ceiling grids for them, which differentiated them entirely from their competition, so that they were basically able to, eliminate other competitors down to maybe one or two others. Okay. So is it, where is your best opportunity? What is it that they really need? And what products or services do they want to buy? Then you can determine what the sales process is in order to to meet the customer's needs. Okay. So some of you are in construction, and in the new construction marketplace, you want to. I used to sell large tonnage air conditioning equipment, and half the game was to get designed by the engineer, and the other half was sell to the contractors. So, you want to be expanding your relationships along those contractors because you know who's going to get the job. But I have another client sells medium voltage transformers, and they sell into solar, which is a direct sale to development companies, but then their commercial business is more through distributors. So they're spending their time with engineers, because the more they can get specified, the easier is it for them to sell through the distribution companies to end use customers. Okay. So normally, going back to the contract manufacturing example, right? If you're in a lot of different areas, how do you know which way to turn? And what you end up doing is, it's more like spray and pray, and you end up in a lot of different market segments, but you're not really building a strong penetration in any one area that you can grow with. Okay. Instead of, focus on, okay, here's where our best opportunity is right now, and then putting a plan in place. So, most of you are in B2B environments. And so, in terms of how do you really determine where to focus, it could be industry vertical, so do you pick, where your best opportunities are, and not have too many, right? I try to get my clients working 2 to 4 specific markets with their go-to-market strategy. Yes, they can catch different customers, in different markets. That's fine. But where do you focus your resources to, gain more market penetration? Maybe it's the end use application of which products or services that you provide have the most demand right now, or maybe it's how they like to buy. E-commerce, for example, has changed a lot of markets, or geographic location. Some of you, really have a real good idea about your markets or who your targets are. I know some of you in fintech, for example, the demographic, firmographic of your target customer, but you're spread all over the place in different countries. So where are you going to focus? You can't possibly, a good test is really how many prospects are there in the geographic area that you're trying to work. And if you've got, many thousands of prospects for every salesperson, you can't possibly put a strategic plan in place for that many prospects. You've got to narrow down your prospective customer target list and narrow it. Maybe it's a geographic limitation, or it's the size in terms of revenue or number of employees, or maybe it's the products that they make. What is it that they're doing that lends itself more to what you do really well. Okay, so on that B2B side, that's the firmographics. On the B2C side, it's the demographic. The person that you need to deal with, you need to get a meeting with, you need to get on the phone, and how do you put that a strategy in place? So that's the internal analysis part of it. Is who is it you're going after, being very specific, and how does what they need line up really well with what you're really good at. Okay, then there's the whole external part. What's happening out there that would indicate that there's a lot of opportunity, or more there's trends that are driving the market within those particular markets that provide the most opportunity for you. Like technology, affects everybody's business. For me, when I started selling, nobody had a computer. Google was formed 13 years later. Now with the internet came, and then social media came, and now it's IA. Okay, it's completely changed, the sales environment, my industry. Okay, or it's how people buy. I have a client that sells batteries for movie cameras, and after the strike that they had, the writer's strike, as the market came back, a lot of the people who were buying were migrating to purchasing online versus purchasing through the rental agencies and the dealers. And so they've had to pivot so they could take advantage of that, and then really partner with the people who have recognized that change, and or public perception, security. I know some of you that are in the fintech area. Security has now enabled you, the perception of security has enabled you to sell more to your existing customers, and or target customer groups. That's basically what we were talking about, how to segment that, or basic customer desires. People, we're programmed for speed. We expect things fast. We expect things to be, we expect to be working with experts, people who are specialists, and we expect quality. The economy affects everybody's business. And then on the other side, it's really how many of those customers do you already have, right? So if you already have good penetration there, that's a good reason to focus there. But a lot of times with contract manufacturers, we find that, they could be, I have one customer that makes crystals for lasers, and, they have 70% of the medical laser market. So for them, it's really how are we going to take their expertise and pivot to other markets, because, already having 70% of the market, it's like trying to get your golf game from 75 to 70, and then how many prospects are there? So if you most of contract manufacturers I work with, they have the 80-20 going on. 80% of their business comes from 20% of their customers. That's fine if there's a lot more prospects out there. You want to get more like your tier 3. But if you have a large percentage of the market already, well, that's a different story. Or how competitive is it? And what's the political climate or are they regulatory things? A lot of my career was in energy conservation, turnkey contracting, and also so my whole career I followed deregulation, and I went from different business opportunity to business opportunity as deregulation of the electric industry and gas industry unfolded, and was able to take advantage of that as they all happened. Okay, so then you focus, and then you aim and adjust, but you have a strategic plan. So now you can put together step 2, which is how are you going to go to market? What's your channels where you can penetrate the market in the best ways? And so it's your marketing plan, your prospecting plan, and your sales process. Okay. And these aren't the same thing, but right now, marketing and prospecting, that needs to be integrated, because, and I, the webinar we did last month was precisely that, was how do you make sure that your marketing and prospecting is coordinated? Because marketing is really generating awareness, but it's how do you get people to the point where they're sitting with you to determine, do they want to buy from you? Okay. And it's not just awareness, it's what you do with it. Prospecting is proactively working channels to get somebody to that point where they're sitting down with you to try to decide, do they want to buy or not? Okay. Selling doesn't start until that happens. And far too often, salespeople are, they don't realize that. They need to have a real good idea about what their customers are thinking about to get a conversation with them first, and then get the meeting. That's when the sales process starts. Okay. And now we have a whole new category, which is revenue operations. And this, how do they take the data that you have available? How do you set yourself up to get that data? And then looking at that data on both sides to determine how effective are your systems, how effective are your marketing and prospecting activities and your sales processes, so that you can improve them and make sure that you're you're as efficient as you can be. So the marketing plan really, it consists of these components. You have to really know who exactly your target markets are, okay, and know exactly what they want. So what are they thinking about now? And then how can you structure that dialogue to get their attention in the first place, to get them on the phone? And then when you do have a conversation, you appear differentiated, you stand out. And so they recognize, okay, this is something I should pay attention to. And then, okay, this seems to be different, so I'm listening. And then how do you deliver these messages when they want it, when they're thinking about it? Okay. And what's that action plan? Okay. So taking a deeper dive into the when part, when somebody's cruising in status quo, basically by definition, this close rate is 0. They have to be thinking about, geez, do we want to solve a problem? And if we did, what would be our objectives and what would be our strategy? Okay. Once they've done that, then they start to explore options and they start searching for alternatives. Then they try to justify, should we make a change? And hopefully you become the new status quo. So there's a couple of problems with this. The first is that if we're catching people when they start to search for alternatives, they've already made some decisions about what they need, what you can provide, and what your competitors can provide. So there's been some decisions already made. The other problem is when they get to that point where they're exploring options, sometimes the decision makers are tagging somebody else at a lower level to go do that. They're easy to get a hold of because their boss told them to go do it. But how do you catch somebody when they're in the green bucket? because that's when the key decision makers are trying to figure out, what is our strategy here? How are we going to do this? Do we want to address it at all? Because if you catch them when they're in the green bucket, then that's going to be a time when they want to talk to you, right? Because you could potentially help them with that evaluation. And so again, be more strategic with who you're going after and understanding what the key people are thinking about or maybe thinking about now is going to enable you to catch them more readily at the right time when they're going to want to talk to you. Okay. And then prospecting. So we want to get our clients working 4 active channels. Okay, you could work passive channels, but we want to be working 4 active channels at the same time, so that you can have different methodologies that work together to get more conversations. Okay, and so you first need to figure out what channels really make sense for you, for your sales teams to be prospecting, to make sure that you are getting the right number of opportunities. Okay. The second part of it is your formula. How much activity do you need? How many deals do you need to close? How many proposals do you need to do? How many meetings do you need to have? And the formula varies depending on what channels you're working, because return on invested time increases as you move up in this hierarchy, right? At cold calling, typically it's 2% return on your invested time, so meaning you need to talk to 50 people to close 1 deal. Now that works if you do the volume. My salesperson, Christine, does a lot of cold calling, and it works for her because she knows how many dials she needs to do every day that she's prospecting. She knows that, and we track it and we go over it every week. Okay, and she knows if she executes, she's going to meet her goal. Okay, and it's just because the markets we're in, it works. People actually do answer the phone if you have the right message and the right approach and the right tools. Okay, direct marketing, if you're mailing, email really is a pretty crowded space. And but think about it. How much mail do you get? How much snail mail do you get in your office every day? Right? How much mail do you get? Probably not a lot. And if you take away people trying to lend you money or people trying to sell you, telecommunication, connectivity or whatever, then you probably have nothing. And it's a blue ocean. But you don't send out 1,000 pieces and just sit there and wait to see if somebody calls you. You send out as many as you can call every single one. And when you do that, you're increasing your return on invested time from probably 3% to something that's much more significant. Or seminars and workshops or speaking engagements. And then this is what I'm doing. I do these webinars, and then people are interested in talking with me, or I get to meet people, or networking, going to trade shows, or going to an association meeting or a conference, or something where there's a room full of your potential prospects. But again, if you want to get medical device customers or you want to get consumer product customers, you're not going to go the same place. Again, another reason to be specific. Okay. And then referrals. How many referrals are you getting from your existing customers? And how are you setting up strategic partnerships? I was with a client today that they sell 85% through distributors. And we were talking about how they leverage their relationships with their distribution partners, and how they're growing that, and how they make decisions about who they're working with and when. okay, and developing those relationships in a much more strategic way, okay, to personal introductions. So, you know, what they're doing is, you know, their regional sales reps that I'm working with are being proactive in trying to get customers and going to see potential customers with their distribution partners. And when you're doing that, you're making introductions personally back and forth. And when you're operating up there, that's 95% return on invested time. Okay. And then your target list, you know, so if you're going to prospect, you know, it starts with the quality of your list. Because if you're not starting with a really good list, then, you know, you're at a disadvantage right out of the gate, you know. And you know, one of you on the registration asked, okay, how do I make my distribution partnerships more strategic? Well, you know, this is where it starts. I mean, my client who sells metrology equipment, you know, they're using Sales Intel, okay, and they have one person who has the subscription. But I tell all the salespeople, you have to go to her and get a list of all of the potential customers in your region, and then we work through that and prioritize them based on their geographic area and the size of the business. And so now, you know, here's who our targets are. So when you go to your distribution partners, they're like, you know, are you talking to these guys? Do you know them? No, you don't. Oh, okay. Well, maybe another distributor knows them, or why don't they know them? Right. So you're setting expectations for them based on, you know, who do you want to penetrate and how well are they dealing with those target customers? Do they meet with them? How often? Do they have relationships there or none? And that makes it more strategic for you. And there's a lot of innovation in this area. I mean, I use Surf. You know, I can go to anyone's LinkedIn profile, hit Surf, it goes automatically into my CRM and gives me their cell phone numbers in seconds. Okay, saves me a ton of time. And so that's the mid-level, you know, service. These range, you know, Apollo, KnowledgeNet, Lusha, Cognizant, all those. They range from $30 to $50 a month kind of price range. The lower level, Data Axle and some list services. You know, I bought a list for $300 with, you know, thousands of names. Or you know, maybe it's a subscription that's like $1,000 a year. And Dun & Bradstreet's a little more, maybe you know, 7,000 or 8,000, and ZoomInfo's make 15,000. But I think they're starting to become overpriced for what they offer compared to some of these other ones. Okay. So common prospecting mistakes: relying just on passive. Okay, marketing's good, but it really needs to support your prospecting. And passive activities can be great, advertising, for example, so social media posting, but the mistake is relying solely on passive. Being too dependent on a single channel, it dries up. You're going to get the roller coaster. We want to have 4 active channels. Not devoting enough time to prospect on a continuous basis. That's common. You know, it's just like anything else. Not important enough to you if you're not making time for it. Now, having a plan to employ or tracking and adjusting to the effectiveness of your sources. Okay. So when you have a strategy and you have a go-to-market marketing and prospecting plan in place, now you can have a better understanding of the market. When I have a first meeting with a new prospective customer, at some point in that first meeting, I'm asking them, okay, tell me about your goal. And I'd say most of the time, I'll get a response like, well, I think based on what we did in 2025, I think we could probably do 10% in 2026. Now, what does that have to do with your market opportunity? Maybe 10% is the right number. But if they're going on and saying, well, you know, because our best opportunities over here in this market, and I think, you know, we are, some of the good customers we got are bringing in this amount of revenue. So if we can get maybe one of those every other month, it equals 10%. Okay, that makes sense to me. We could figure out a strategy to make sure that happens. Okay, and put that plan in place, right? And monitor that formula to make sure that it happens, or you exceed it, or make adjustments to make sure, you know, that month to month it's happening. Okay, rather than waiting towards the end of quarter and determining, well, geez, I don't know if we're gonna ever catch up. Okay, any questions so far? I didn't check. All right, there's 2 questions here. IT, specifically fintech. Okay, providing services to banks and lending companies. Okay, so again, banks and lending companies are a specific market, and you know, I think you guys really know that market really well. You've been there for so long, a long time. So that it should be easy enough for you to understand what's happening in banking. And it's a highly regulated marketplace too. So that you can put together messaging that will actually get conversations with what they're thinking about right now. Okay. And I think part of the problem you're having is you're spread too thin geographically. And I think you need to really think about where is it that you're going to have your best opportunities, and let's focus there and build some market penetration in areas. And I think, you know, you also have a great opportunity now to sell more to your existing customers in the area of security. And that's a great thing because there's a lot of awareness there and a lot of things going on and innovation. So that's what I would suggest. Let's see. All right, I'm stepping out. Any other questions? Put them up in the chat. Okay, step 3 now is designing your sales force. Okay, so now, like I said, you have a strategy. You know how you're going to go to market in terms of marketing and prospecting. Now you can determine, okay, based on these targets and how we need to go to market to penetrate it, you can now take a look at your sales force structure. Do we have the right people to execute the way they need to on the sales process? And do we have the right size? Are we undersized for the market? Are we oversized for the market? And where are the gaps in our resources, either with people or with resources? Okay, and then assign the responsibilities to your existing team to make sure that you're penetrating the market or able to execute the way that customers want to buy. Okay, you know, for example, you know, should you go distribution or should you go direct? You know, a lot of that in contract manufacturing or manufacturing in general, they tend to go through distribution or sales agencies. Okay, and a lot of manufacturers are at least employing regional salespeople to work alongside them, or taking it over and going direct. It really depends. And then that HVAC ventilation company is a great example in terms of how they're addressing the clean room marketplace. The other thing is, based on how you what you're selling and how you select the customers and what they need, maybe you can have your sales team specialize in certain areas based on how those markets are, how specialized those markets are, or like the medium voltage transformer company and switchgear company, how they address the solar market versus how they address the conventional construction market, quite a bit different. And so, we are, then making decisions based on inside sales and outside sales and how they're spending their time based on that. And then the size, how are you sized for the market? And then what is, or the activities that your sales team members need to be doing so that you can monitor that and they can keep themselves accountable for doing what they need to do. Okay. And then take a look at where the gaps are and fill those roles where you need to. Do you really need to hire an account executive at a higher price point to go out and prospect and sell? Or is it, do you need more account management so that you can deal with existing customers and make sure they're getting covered adequately, so the account executives can now spend more time out bringing in new tier 3 customers? Or is it that, I just have a contract manufacturer that just hired an outside sales development rep, so now she's out prospecting and setting meetings for the two partners that are doing most of we're doing most of the selling, but they were so busy with existing customers, they didn't really have time to do any prospecting. So now they're turning over a lot more opportunities, but we've already really taken a look at their customer base and determined which existing customers have the best opportunity for growth and what that next ideal tier 3 customer looks like, so we can then focus her activities on getting more tier 3 potential customers, not ones that are going to be a tier 7 and always be a tier 7. Okay. Or do you need somebody that, you're getting a lot of good marketing leads, and you need somebody that's really addressing those leads on an ongoing basis so that your salespeople aren't wasting time on things that are not ready or not good opportunities. Okay. Or should you be using independent reps or distributors to cover an area where you don't have any local penetration yet, geographically or in a market? Okay. And, to determine really what you need, take a look at where are your salespeople spending their time now? Because, if they're spending, say, 20-25% or more of their time in any one area, maybe you need to fill in those gaps with someone else, perhaps, and because you don't want them to be bogged down on things that are going to prevent them from, closing more opportunities. Okay. All right. Media. Let's see. Since technically everyone's is in your market, how would you narrow that down? Okay. The fact that everybody potentially could buy what you need, what you have to offer, doesn't mean that you should be selling to everybody. What we're talking about here is, how do you be strategic with your time? Because, if you want to sell to everybody, then you're going to need to really bring in a lot of capital and expand your sales force significantly. Okay. So yeah, yes, maybe everybody can buy, but you know, again, so I have a client that sells they sell seismology and geotechnical measurement devices. Okay. And part of the reason why they hired me was because a big market they're in is windmills. So, when somebody's building a windmill, they need to know the geographic structure of, under the seafloor so that they can build the foundation, right? Well, our illustrious government decided that, windmills are no more. And so that market went to nothing. And so if I'm telling, can they be in the windmill market? Absolutely. Should they be focusing on that right now? Absolutely not. Okay. So where is their best opportunity? We're looking at other areas where, mining minerals and in other areas where there is growth. That's where we want to focus. And for you, so you're selling media. I'm not really sure what that is, but which areas are where there are a lot of opportunity, and how does that line up with your existing reading readers are, and then who is it that is going to gain the most, or how are you positioning your potential? I'm assuming you want advertisers. So if you want advertisers, who is it going to gain the most from being visible in your publication, and uh, and and how do you demonstrate that to them, or how what's that message there that can give you some focus? I hope that's helpful. If you feel free to unmute, and if I'm missing the mark on that, let me know, or ask another question. You're emailing a bunch of cold leads. Okay. Next step to turn them into prospects. Okay, first of all, I'm a phone person. Okay. So to me, sending an email, there's only one reason to send an email, and that's to get somebody on the phone. And so for me, my approach is I'm going to call them first. Okay. And so again, I'm taking a step back now. We're really strategic about who we're going after. So we've got maybe some prioritization for our targets. Okay. And then number two, you got a good list. So you've got accurate data of who you want to talk to and what their contact information is. To me, I'd pick up the phone and call them. So I'd call them in the morning, and then maybe you call them in the afternoon. Now you've doubled the chance that you're going to catch them. Then I would send them an email. But the fact of the matter is, now you think about it, think of yourself, okay? You're potentially a target for somebody else that's selling something that you're thinking maybe someday I'll buy that. Okay. And you get an email from somebody that's in your inbox with all the other emails you got that day. Are you going to reply right away? The fact that you got an email and it's actually something you're thinking about, don't expect people to reply, because everybody's busy. Okay. So when I send an email that says, hey, you know what? I've been trying to reach you. Here's why. I'm going to call you Tuesday, just to let them know why you're calling in case they are interested. And then on Tuesday, they may be more likely to pick up the phone, or they will ignore you because they're really not a prospect. But we, again, because we're being so specific, we can be really on point with our messaging about what. Here's the thing. Prospecting is a process of elimination. I'm going to say that again. Prospecting is a process of elimination. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to call 100 people, there's probably 30 in that 100 that may buy what you have to sell over the next 6 months. That means you got to get rid of the 70 who won't. Okay. And the biggest problem is people are calling 50, so therefore they're at risk for failure because they're not calling at least 70. Okay, but you know, you're throwing stuff out there, and you think these people might be, because we're being strategic, wanting to buy what you have, and it's those 30 you want to find. So you got to do enough to get those 30. And those 30, out of those 30, there's maybe 10 that are ready to buy now. Okay. And so you got to know volume to really get to those 10. And then you've got to really determine, get them on the phone. And so our messages need to be on point enough so that out of those 100, those 30, you get some kind of response. But the best way, in my opinion, is to really call them in the first place and use a combination of phone calls and emails and social media, provided that you don't already know somebody who knows them that can introduce you. That's your first course of action. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. If you have more questions about that, we can talk about it. All right. So, and then you need to have a sales process that basically enables you. We've already talked about the marketing and prospecting plan. That's the topic for today. But you've got to build trust, and you got to qualify opportunities so that you're not wasting time or you're dealing with things that stall on you, and then close the business, and then set up an implementation and customer retention plan so that, they stay as customers and you have ongoing business with them. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop it there and entertain questions. Let's see.